Millionaire sees cleaner studying law in secret, and what he does next changes everything. Margaret Johnson felt her legs tremble as she held the constitutional law book against her chest. At 53, after decades of cleaning offices, she had been caught doing something that could cost her job. "Can you explain what you're doing here after hours?" asked the deep voice behind her. Margaret turned slowly, still sitting on the cold floor of the 22nd floor hallway. Before her stood Richard Thompson, the owner of the entire business building, a 45-year-old man known for his cold business demeanor and fortune estimated in the hundreds of millions. "I'm sorry, Dr. Richard. I was just finishing cleaning and—" Margaret tried to hide the book behind her back, but he had already seen it. "Constitutional law?" Richard raised an eyebrow, stepping closer. Interesting reading for someone who should be cleaning bathrooms. Margaret's heart raced. Working in that building was the best job she'd ever had. The pay was fair, she had health insurance, and she could support her 80-year-old mother who lived with her. Losing this opportunity would be devastating. "Please, doctor, I wasn't doing anything wrong, I just was reading a bit before leaving," she said, getting up with difficulty, the weight of years of hard work evident in her movements. "And where did you get this book?" Richard asked, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. Margaret hesitated. The truth was, she had found the book in the trash of one of the law firms on the 15th floor. The lawyer had thrown away a pile of old books during a renovation, and she couldn't resist taking a few. "I found it in the trash, doctor. I know maybe I shouldn't have taken it, but—" Her voice faltered. How to explain to a millionaire that she had dreamed of studying law since she was 20, but never had the means? Richard remained silent for long seconds, studying her. Margaret recognized that look. It was the same she had received from many bosses throughout her life, contempt disguised as curiosity. "How long have you worked here?" he finally asked. 3 years, doctor. I've always been punctual, never missed a day, never broke anything." Margaret spoke quickly, trying to defend herself against an accusation that hadn't even been made. "And how long have you been studying law in secret after hours?" The question took Margaret by surprise. How did he know it wasn't the first time? She swallowed dryly. "About 6 months, doctor. But I swear it never interfered with my work. I always finish all the cleaning before—" "You do clean well," Richard interrupted, looking around the impeccable hallway. "Especially considering you do this alone on 2 entire floors." Margaret didn't know if that was a compliment or an observation before being fired. She remained silent, wringing her hands nervously. "So you can go home, Margaret. We'll talk tomorrow." The use of her name surprised her. In 3 years, Richard Thompson had never addressed her directly, much less by name. Margaret quickly gathered her cleaning supplies and the book, giving a slight bow before heading to the elevator. During the entire trip to her home in the Brooklyn neighborhood, Margaret couldn't stop thinking about the conversation. What did that strange look from the boss mean? And why hadn't he yelled at her or fired her on the spot? She arrived at the small 2-bedroom apartment she shared with her mother, Mrs. Dorothy. The elderly woman was watching the 9 o'clock soap opera in the living room, wrapped in a worn blanket. "You're late today, dear," commented Mrs. Dorothy without taking her eyes off the television. "I had some problems at work, Mom," Margaret replied, hiding the book under the bed before her mother could ask questions. That night, Margaret barely managed to sleep. She tossed and turned in bed, thinking about all the possibilities. Would she be fired? Maybe Richard just wanted to warn her. Or worse, perhaps he wanted to make an example of her for other employees. At 5 in the morning, as always, Margaret got up to prepare coffee and her mother's medicine before leaving for work. Mrs. Dorothy suffered from severe arthritis and depended on Margaret for almost everything. "You're very quiet today, dear. Did something happen?" asked the elderly woman, noticing the tension on her daughter's face. "Nothing serious, Mom, just tired," lied Margaret, not wanting to worry the woman who already had enough health problems. When she arrived at the commercial building in the financial district, Margaret greeted Mr. Frank, the doorman, as she always did. But today there was something different in the air. The other cleaning staff looked at her strangely, whispering among themselves. "Margaret, you need to go straight up to the 25th floor," said Mr. Frank, avoiding her gaze. "Dr. Richard wants to speak with you." The 25th floor was where Richard Thompson's private office was located. Margaret had never been there, Her work was limited to the law and accounting office floors. The elevator seemed to rise in slow motion. With each floor, Margaret felt her stomach tightening more. When the doors opened, she found herself facing an environment completely different from the rest of the building. Marble floors, fine wood furniture, paintings that seemed to be worth more than her salary for an entire year. Ms. Margaret, an elegant young secretary, greeted her. "Dr. Richard is waiting. Please, follow me." Margaret followed the young woman down a wide hallway to a double door of carved wood. The secretary knocked gently. "Come in," came Richard's voice from the other side. The office was even more impressive than the rest of the floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of New York City. Behind a huge mahogany desk, Richard was standing, flipping through some papers. "Sit down, Margaret," he said, pointing to a leather chair in front of the desk. Margaret sat on the edge of the chair, her hands crossed in her lap, expecting the worst. "How long have you dreamed of being a lawyer?" asked Richard, getting straight to the point. The unexpected question caught Margaret completely off guard. "Excuse me, Doctor." "It's a simple question. How long have you dreamed of studying law?" Margaret swallowed dryly. There was something in his voice that made her feel she should be honest. "Since I was 20, Doctor, but I never had the means to study." "Why not?" "I started working at 15 to help my mother. My father left us when I was a child and my mother got sick. There was never enough money for college." Richard nodded, making notes on a notepad. "And what do you plan to do with a law degree at 53 years old?" "Doctor, Margaret stopped, realizing he knew exactly her age. "I want to help people like me, people who work their whole lives and never have their rights respected." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out, now continuing. Richard closed the notepad and looked directly at her. "Margaret, I know you've been studying secretly here for months. I know you take books from the trash and stay up late reading. I also know your work has never been affected by this." Margaret's blood ran cold. How did he know all this? "The security cameras record everything that happens in this building," explained Richard, as if he had read her thoughts. "Initially I thought it was theft, but I soon realized you only took books that were being discarded." Margaret felt her cheeks burn with shame. Being caught studying was humiliating enough, but knowing she had been watched for months was devastating. "Please, Dr. Richard, I can explain." "No need to explain anything," he interrupted. "Actually, I want to make a proposal." Margaret blinked, confused. "Proposal?" "I'm creating a scholarship program for dedicated employees. You would be the first beneficiary." For a moment, Margaret thought she had misheard. "I'm sorry, Doctor, I don't understand." "A full scholarship to study law at Columbia University. In return, you would continue working here during the day and study at night." Margaret felt the world spin. This was too good to be true. "Doctor, I don't know what to say." "Say you accept." "But why? Why would you do this for me?" Richard remained silent for a moment, looking out the window. "Let's say I admire determination, and few people I know show as much determination as you." Margaret felt her eyes fill with tears. After decades of dreaming about it, the opportunity was literally in front of her. "I accept, Doctor. I accept with all my heart." "Great. My secretary has all the papers for you to sign. Classes start on Monday." Margaret left the office in a daze. She couldn't believe what had happened. All day, she worked with an unstoppable smile on her face, but the joy was short-lived. At lunchtime, Marlene, one of the other cleaners, approached her in the locker room. "So it's true. You're going to become a college student?" asked Marlene with a sharp tone. "Yes, it's true. Dr. Richard offered me a scholarship," replied Margaret, still not believing her own words. "How interesting," said Marlene, crossing her arms. "And what did you do to get that?" "What do you mean?" "Come on, Margaret. We're not fools. A rich man doesn't give a scholarship to a cleaner without wanting something in return." Margaret felt as if she had been slapped in the face. "Marlene, it's nothing like that. He saw that I studied and—" "Sure," Marlene rolled her eyes. "And I'm the Queen of England. Be careful, Margaret." Rich men don't do anything for free. Marlene's words echoed in Margaret's head all afternoon. Could it be that Richard had ulterior motives? She pushed the thought away. She couldn't let other people's jealousy destroy the opportunity of a lifetime. On Monday, Margaret arrived at Columbia University with her heart racing. At 53, she would be the oldest student in the class by decades. She wore her best outfit, a navy blue skirt and a white blouse she had bought on sale years ago. The classroom was full of 18 and 19-year-olds. When Margaret entered, all conversations stopped. The students looked at her with curiosity, and some with disguised disdain. "I think you're in the wrong room," said a blonde young woman with a superior air. "The senior citizen classes are in the building next door." Some laughter echoed through the room. Margaret felt her face burn, but maintained her composure. "I'm in the right room," she replied firmly, looking for a place to sit. The professor arrived a few minutes later, Dr. Charles Ferguson, a middle-aged man with glasses and a serious demeanor. "Welcome to the first day of Introduction to Law," he said, scanning the room. His eyes stopped on Margaret for a moment. "I see we have a diverse class this year." Throughout the class, Margaret took notes furiously. Every word from the professor was precious. She had waited 33 years for that moment. On her way out, the blonde young woman who had made the initial comment approached her again. "May I ask what a woman of your age is doing here?" she said with false politeness. "Studying law just like you," replied Margaret, putting her books into her worn-out bag. "But why? Shouldn't you be taking care of grandchildren or something?" Margaret stopped and stared at the young woman. "Should I be, Brittany?" She read the name on the girl's badge. "And shouldn't you be studying instead of worrying about other students' ages?" Brittany was left speechless, and Margaret left the room with her head held high. The first few months were brutal. Margaret woke up at 5 in the morning, worked from 7 to 5, ate dinner quickly and rushed to college. She got home at 11 at night, studied until 1 in the morning, and woke up 4 hours later to start all over again. Mrs. Dorothy noticed the change in her daughter. "Margaret, you're killing yourself. Look how thin you are with those dark circles." "I'm fine, Mum. It's just until I get used to the routine." "This is no way to live, dear. Maybe you should drop out of college and—" "No," Margaret interrupted more vehemently than she intended. "I'm sorry, Mum, but I'm not giving up. Not now." At work, the situation was also getting complicated. The other cleaning staff had started treating her differently, some with envy, others with suspicion. "Here comes the doctor," Marlene would whisper whenever Margaret passed by. "Be careful not to get your hands dirty, doctor," mocked Josh, the cleaner from the 10th floor. Margaret tried to ignore it, but the taunts hurt, especially because they came from people she considered friends. One day, arriving at college, Margaret found her books torn inside her backpack. Someone had cut the pages with a blade. She sat on a bench in the hallway and cried for the first time since starting the course. "Family problems?" asked a gentle voice behind her. Margaret turned and saw Dr. Charles Ferguson, her Introduction to Law professor. "No, Professor, just problems with young people who don't know how to respect their elders." "Ah, I see, academic vandalism. Unfortunately, it's more common than it should be." He sat down beside her. "May I ask why you decided to study law at 53? Margaret wiped her eyes and told her story. The professor listened attentively without interrupting. "You know, Margaret, in 20 years of teaching, I've seen many talented young people give up over obstacles much smaller than yours. Your determination is inspiring." "Thank you, Professor. Sometimes I feel like I'm swimming against the current." "You are. But it's those people who change the world. The complacent just maintain the status quo." That conversation gave Margaret the strength to continue. She bought new books with the money she was saving to fix the house shower and moved forward. But the problems were just beginning. One day, arriving at work, Margaret was called to the Human Resources Department. "Margaret, we've received some complaints about your performance," said Valerie Peters, the HR manager, a 40-year-old woman known for her coldness. "Complaints? About what?" "Some colleagues say you've been distracted, that you haven't been finishing your work properly." Margaret couldn't believe what she was hearing. "May I know who made these complaints?" "That's confidential, but I must warn you that any drop in the quality of your work could result in termination." Margaret left the meeting devastated. She knew the accusations were false. Her work had always been impeccable, and she made sure to check everything twice before leaving. That afternoon, she decided to stay a bit later to make sure everything was perfect. She was cleaning the bathrooms on the 22nd floor when she heard voices in the hallway. "See? She's still here, trying to impress the boss. I bet he must be tired of her already. Rich men get bored quickly with used toys." Margaret recognized the voices of Marlene and Josh. They were talking about her as if she were a prostitute. She felt anger rising, but took a deep breath and kept working. "The only way is to force a situation to get her fired," continued Marlene. "I can't stand that snob with privileges we don't have." "I agree." "Who does she think she is?" said Josh. Margaret finished cleaning the bathroom with her hands trembling with indignation. How could people she had known for 3 years be so cruel? At college, things weren't easy either. Brittany had formed a group of students who enjoyed humiliating Margaret whenever possible. "Professor, could you speak more slowly? Aunt Margaret can't keep up," said Brittany during a civil law class. "Miss Brittany, I suggest you worry about your own studies. Your grade on the last test was well below average," the professor replied firmly. "It must be because I waste time helping the more experienced classmates." Margaret maintained her composure, but inside she felt like screaming. The constant humiliation was starting to affect her self-esteem. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. One night, arriving home especially late, Margaret found Mrs. Dorothy on the kitchen floor, moaning in pain. "Mom, what happened?" "I fell trying to get a glass of water. I think I hurt my hip." Margaret helped her mother up and noticed she had a high fever. Without thinking twice, she called a taxi and took her to the emergency room. They spent the whole night at the hospital. Mrs. Dorothy had fractured her hip and needed urgent surgery. Margaret called work to say she couldn't come in that day. "Margaret, you've already been absent twice this month because of your mother," said Valerie, the HR manager. "I can't accept any more absences. She's hospitalized. She needs surgery. I have no one else. I'm sorry, but either you come to work or it will be considered job abandonment." Margaret hung up the phone with tears in her eyes. How to choose between her job and her mother? She stayed at the hospital until her mother came out of surgery. When she arrived at work late in the afternoon, she found a warning letter on her desk. "A warning for missing work to care for my sick mother?" she asked Valerie. "It's company policy, Margaret. You signed the contract." That night at college, Margaret could barely concentrate in class. She was exhausted, worried about her mother, and outraged by the injustice at work. "Mrs. Margaret, may I speak with you after class?" asked Professor Charles. "Of course, Professor." When everyone had left, he approached. "You look terrible. Is everything all right?" Margaret told him about her mother's situation and the problems at work. "Have you thought about talking to your boss about this? From what you've told me, he seems like a reasonable person." "I can't bother him with my personal problems, Professor. He's already done so much for me." "Margaret, a fair boss understands family emergencies, and you're an exemplary employee." Margaret promised to consider the suggestion, but she didn't have the courage to approach Richard. What if he changed his mind about the scholarship? In the following days, the situation became even more complicated. Mrs. Dorothy needed special care at home, and Margaret had to hire a daytime caregiver, which consumed almost her entire salary. At work, Marlene and Josh intensified their attacks. They started tampering with Margaret's cleaning supplies, hiding products and creating situations to make her seem incompetent. "Margaret, there's a leak in the men's bathroom on the 15th floor. You didn't clean it properly," said Marlene with a malicious smile. Margaret went to check and discovered that someone had deliberately clogged the toilet with toilet paper. She spent 2 hours cleaning up the mess. At college, the hostility also increased. Brittany and her friends began spreading rumors about Margaret. "Did you hear she got the scholarship by offering herself to the boss?" Brittany whispered in the hallways. "Geez, how disgusting. A woman her age doing that kind of thing," another student replied. Margaret heard the comments and felt her heart breaking. Her reputation was being destroyed in every environment she frequented. One day, after her constitutional law class, Margaret found a crude inscription on her locker door. Old prostitute. She quickly wiped it off with tissues, but several people saw. That night, upon arriving home, Margaret found Mrs. Dorothy crying in the living room. "What's wrong, Mum?" "The caregiver told me some horrible things, honey, about you and your boss." Margaret sat beside her mother, exhausted. "Mum, you know it's not true." "I know, honey, but people are talking. The neighbor from 302 asked me if it was true you were prostituting yourself to pay for college." Margaret started crying. The humiliation had reached her own home. "Honey, maybe it's better for you to drop out of college. It's not worth all this suffering." "I can't give up now, Mum. I'm in my second semester. I've learned so much already." "But look at the price you're paying. You're destroyed, thin, not sleeping. And now these awful rumors." Margaret knew her mother was right, but the idea of quitting terrified her. It would mean admitting defeat to all the people who doubted her. The following week, the incident that almost made her give up everything happened. Margaret was cleaning the law office on the 17th floor when she heard loud voices coming from the reception. "Where is that cleaning lady?" a woman shouted. Margaret went to the reception and found an elegant woman around 50 years old, well-dressed and visibly upset. "Are you looking for me?" "You're Margaret Johnson?" "Yes, I am. How can I help you?" "I'm Patricia Thompson, wife of Richard Thompson." Margaret's blood ran cold. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Patricia." "Nice is too strong a word for the situation," Patricia said disdainfully. "I need to have a serious talk with you." Margaret looked around. Several people in the office were watching the scene. "Can we talk in private? There's no need." "Everyone already knows anyway." Patricia raised her voice deliberately. "Do you think I'm stupid? Do you think I don't know what's going on between you and my husband?" "Mrs. Patricia, there's nothing going on between—" "Don't treat me like a fool," Patricia shouted. "My husband has never been interested in employees before, never gave scholarships to anyone. And suddenly you show up a cleaning lady who makes him spend fortunes on education?" Margaret felt everyone in the office looking at her, some laughing, others whispering. "I can explain." "You don't need to explain anything. I just want you to know that I know women like you. Opportunists who play the victim to seduce rich men." Patricia's words were like daggers. Margaret felt tears in her eyes but struggled not to cry in front of everyone. "Mrs. Patricia, I never what? Never hit on my husband? Never hinted around to get favors? Never," Margaret said with a firm voice despite the inner trembling. "Then explain to me how a 50-year-old cleaning lady gets a full scholarship to an expensive private university." Margaret took a deep breath. She couldn't tell about the nights studying in secret, about the books picked from the trash. It was too personal, too painful. "I study hard. I've always studied. Your husband recognized my effort." Patricia gave a bitter laugh. "How convenient. And I'm sure this recognition happened after hours, when you two were alone in the building." "That's not it," Margaret exploded, losing her composure. "I work honestly, study honestly, and I've never done anything wrong." "Of course not," said Patricia with sarcasm. "And I was born yesterday." Ricardo's wife turned to leave but stopped at the door. "Just so you know, dear, I'll be speaking personally with my husband about that scholarship. I highly doubt it will continue after our conversation." Patricia left, leaving Margaret standing in the middle of the reception area with everyone staring at her. The silence was deafening. "You can all get back to work," someone said, and the conversations resumed, now in whispers. Margaret finished cleaning that floor on autopilot. She felt humiliated, destroyed, without the strength to continue. Maybe it was really time to give up. That night at college, Margaret could barely pay attention in class. The conversation with Patricia echoed in her head. What if Richard really cancelled the scholarship? What if that was her last week as a college student? "Margaret, are you okay?" asked Brooke, one of the few classmates who treated her with respect. "Yes, thank you." "Are you sure? You look very pale." Margaret forced a smile. "Just tired." But it wasn't just tiredness. It was the weight of carrying an unfair accusation, of seeing her most precious dream tarnished by cruel insinuations. As she left college, Brittany approached her again. "I heard your boss's wife came looking for you today," she said, with a malicious smile. "How did you know that?" My aunt works in the 17th floor office. She said it was quite a scene. Margaret tried to walk past Brittany, but the young woman blocked her path. Must have been embarrassing, huh? Being exposed in front of everyone. Brittany, please. I imagine your scholarship will be cancelled. What a shame. Right during exam season. Margaret couldn't take it anymore. She pushed Brittany aside and ran out of the college. She arrived home in tears. Mrs. Dorothy was asleep, thanks to her pain medication. Margaret sat in the kitchen and cried, as she hadn't cried since childhood. She cried for the humiliation, the injustice, the dreams that seemed to be falling apart. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe she was too old. Maybe she was dreaming too big. Maybe a 53-year-old cleaner really shouldn't aspire to be a lawyer. The next morning, Margaret arrived at work expecting to be called in for termination, but the hours passed normally. In the afternoon, Mr. Frank came looking for her. Margaret, Dr. Richard wants to speak with you, 25th floor. Margaret went up with her heart in her throat. She was prepared for the worst. Richard greeted her in his office, but there was something different in his expression. He seemed sad. Have a seat, Margaret. She sat down, mentally preparing to hear about the scholarship cancellation. My wife came to speak with me yesterday, Richard began. I know, Doctor, and I want you to know that— Let me finish, he interrupted gently. Patricia told me about the conversation you had, about the accusations she made. Margaret lowered her head, expecting the final blow. And I want to apologize. Margaret looked up, surprised. Apologize? For my wife humiliating you in that way, for questioning your integrity, and for not being clearer about my reasons for offering the scholarship. Margaret didn't understand. Your reasons? Richard stood up and went to the window. Margaret, I watched you studying in secret for months before offering the scholarship. I saw your determination, your dedication. I saw a woman who worked all day and still found the strength to study at night. He turned to her. Do you know why that impressed me so much? Margaret shook her head. Because it reminded me of my mother. The revelation took Margaret by surprise. Your mother. My mother was a cleaner her whole life. She worked in offices, cleaned bathrooms, carried heavy buckets until her final years, all so I could study. Richard returned to his chair. She dreamed of studying law. He always said he wanted to defend people like her, but he never had the opportunity. When she passed away 5 years ago, I promised myself that one day I would help someone like her achieve that dream. Margaret felt her eyes fill with tears. When I saw you studying in that hallway, I saw my mother. The same determination, the same dream, the same dignity. Dr. Richard, The scholarship won't be cancelled, Margaret. It was never a matter of charity or other insinuations. It was justice. It was honouring the memory of a woman who deserved to have had the same opportunity I'm offering you. Margaret could no longer hold back the tears. Thank you, Doctor. Thank you for believing in me. Keep studying, Margaret. Keep dreaming. And when you graduate, honour your profession the same way you honour your current work. Margaret left Richard's office with a completely different feeling. For the first time in weeks, she felt respected, valued. But the problems hadn't ended yet. When she reached the locker room to get her cleaning supplies, she found Marlene waiting for her. I heard you talk to the boss today, Marlene said with a malicious tone. Yes, I did. So, did he cancel your special little scholarship? He didn't cancel it, Margaret replied calmly. What a pity, said Marlene, not bothering to hide her disappointment. So you're going to keep thinking you're better than us? Marlene, I never thought I was better than anyone. Of course you do. Ever since you started that college, you barely talked to us, acting all important. Margaret took a deep breath. She was tired of being attacked for wanting to improve her life. Marlene, I've worked here for 3 years. I've always been respectful to everyone. If I decided to study, it's because I have that right. Right? Marlene gave a bitter laugh. Women our age don't have the right to keep dreaming. We have to accept what life has given us. I don't accept it, Margaret said firmly, and you shouldn't either. What do you mean by that? You're smart, Marlene. You've worked here longer than I have. Why don't you try for something better? Because I know my place, Marlene replied angrily, and I don't go humiliating myself chasing after rich men for favors. No one is humiliating themselves. I'm studying, working honestly. And I don't work honestly? Marlene became agitated. Just because I don't have a college degree, my work is worth less? Margaret realized she had touched a deep wound. That's not it, Marlene. I apologize if it sounded that way. I don't want your apologies. I want you to get off your high horse and stop making us feel inferior. Margaret understood in that moment that Marlene's anger wasn't really against her. It was against her own life, against missed opportunities, against the feeling of being trapped in a cycle with no way out. Marlene, if you want, I can help you study too. We can— I don't need your help, Marlene interrupted sharply. I don't need anyone's pity. Marlene left the locker room, slamming the door. Margaret was left alone, reflecting on the conversation. She understood Marlene's pain, but she couldn't let other people's bitterness make her give up on her dreams. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. In the following weeks, Margaret noticed a subtle change in the work environment. After the conversation with Richard, some people began treating her with more respect. Others, however, increased their hostility. Josh especially seemed to have developed a real campaign against her. He started spreading even crueler rumors. "Did you hear she blackmailed the boss?" he said loudly in the cafeteria so Margaret could hear. "Threatened to tell his wife about their secret meetings." Margaret tried to ignore it, but the accusations were becoming increasingly absurd and painful. At college, the situation was also developing unexpectedly. Professor Charles had noticed the exceptional quality of Margaret's answers on exams and began praising her publicly. Mrs. Johnson's answer about the hierarchy of laws was the most complete in the class, he said during a lecture. Brittany and her friends were visibly annoyed. After class, the young blonde approached Margaret in the hallway. "The professor is going easy on you because of your age," she said with venom in her voice. "What do you mean?" "Oh, Margaret, everyone knows teachers feel sorry for older students. They give better grades out of pity. My grades are the result of my studying, Brittany." "Of course they are," Brittany rolled her eyes, "and I'm the Queen of France." "If you studied as much as you criticize others, maybe your grades would be better," Margaret retorted, losing her patience. "How dare you? A cleaning lady giving me lessons on how to study." "A cleaning lady who's at the top of the class," Margaret said without modesty. It was true, and she had worked hard to achieve it. Brittany turned red with anger. "This won't last long, you can be sure of that." Margaret didn't pay much attention to the threat, but she should have. Brittany was the daughter of an influential lawyer and wasn't used to losing to anyone, much less a 50-year-old cleaning lady. A few days later, Margaret was summoned by the course coordination. "Mrs. Johnson, we've received a serious complaint against you," said the coordinator, Dr. Marina Foster. A serious woman around 40 years old. "A complaint? About what?" "An accusation of cheating during exams." Margaret felt the world spin. "Cheating? I've never cheated in my life." "Some students reported seeing you consulting notes during the last civil law exam." "That's a lie." Margaret became agitated. "Who made this accusation?" "I can't reveal names, but we have to investigate. During the next exam, you will be observed more closely." Margaret left the coordination office devastated. She knew who had made the complaint, but couldn't prove it. It was her word against that of young students from influential families. That night, she talked to Mrs. Dorothy about what happened. "Mom, I don't know what to do anymore. It seems like everyone is against me." "My dear, you've always been honest. If you haven't done anything wrong, the truth will come out." "But what if it doesn't? What if I get expelled from college over a false accusation?" Mrs. Dorothy held her daughter's hand. "Margaret, remember when you were little and the boys at school made fun of you for wearing patched clothes?" "I remember." "What did I tell you?" "That clothes don't make the person, that what matters is character." "Exactly. And your character has always been impeccable. Keep being who you are, my dear. The right people will recognize that." On the day of the observed exam, Margaret arrived at college with a knot in her stomach. There were 2 proctors specifically to watch her, in addition to the regular professor. Throughout the exam, she felt the proctor's eyes on her. Every movement was noted, Every time she checked her watch or adjusted her pen seemed suspicious. Margaret finished the exam certain she had done well, but with her heart heavy from the injustice of the situation. A week later, the results came out. Margaret had gotten the highest grade in the class again. The proctors reported that they hadn't observed any suspicious behavior. "The accusations against you have been deemed unfounded," said Dr. Marina. "I apologize for the embarrassment." "And the students who made the false report?" Margaret asked. "Unfortunately, it's difficult to prove bad faith. But it's recorded that the investigation found no basis for the accusations." Margaret knew that was the most satisfaction she would get. At least her academic reputation was clean. But Brittany didn't give up easily. She started a new strategy, boycotting group assignments that included Margaret. "I won't do work with her," she said during a criminal law class. "I'd rather work alone." "The assignment is mandatory group work, Miss Brittany," said the professor. "Then I request to switch groups." Margaret ended up in a group with 3 students who clearly didn't want to be there. During meetings, they talked among themselves as if she weren't present. "Let's divide it this way. I'll do the introduction, you do the body, he'll do the conclusion," said one of the boys, completely ignoring Margaret. "And me?" asked Margaret. "Oh, you can format the paper. Make it look nice," the boy replied condescendingly. Margaret took a deep breath. She was being treated as the secretary of her own study group. "I'd prefer to contribute to the academic content," she said firmly. "Look, Ma'am, no offense, but we want to get a good grade. It's better to leave the heavy lifting to those with more academic experience," said the girl in the group. Academic experience? Margaret couldn't believe what she was hearing. "I have the highest grades in the class." "For now," murmured the third member. Margaret decided to do her part of the assignment alone and present it separately to the professor. When the group presented, it became clear their work was superficial and poorly researched. "Ms. Johnson, where's your contribution to this assignment?" asked the professor. "Here, Professor." Margaret handed over a 20-page analysis of criminal law jurisprudence. The professor quickly flipped through it, and his eyes widened. "This work is exceptional. Why wasn't it integrated into the group's presentation?" The 3 young students turned red with shame. Margaret didn't need to say anything. The professor understood the situation. "Mrs. Johnson, you'll receive an individual grade. As for the rest of the group, you'll have to redo the assignment." After class, the boy who had suggested she just format the paper approached her. "Margaret, I'm sorry, we were stupid." "Yes, you were," she replied bluntly. "It's just, we didn't imagine you knew so much. You work as a cleaner, so you assumed I was dumb." "Not dumb, but academically inexperienced." Margaret looked at the young man with a mixture of pity and irritation. "Matthew, you're 18 years old, in your first year of college, and have never worked a day in your life. I'm 53 years old, have been working for almost 40 years, and have been studying law for over a year. Who has more life experience?" Matthew lowered his head. "You're right. It was prejudice, plain and simple. It was. And I hope you learn from this." Gradually, some classmates began to respect Margaret, especially after she helped several of them with questions about subjects she mastered well. Brooke, the girl who had always been kind to Margaret, became a true friend. "Margaret, can I ask you something personal?" she said one day, during break. "Of course." "How do you manage to study while working all day?" "I live with my parents, don't work, and still struggle to keep up." Margaret smiled. "Brooke, when you really want something, you find strength you didn't know you had. But it's not just willpower. You actually understand the subjects better than most of us. Maybe it's because I see practical applications in everything I study. You study theory, I study cases that could happen to people I know." "What do you mean?" "When we study labor laws, I think of my co-workers. When we study consumer law, I think of my mother being cheated in stores. For me, it's not abstract." Brooke became thoughtful. "I never thought about it that way. You have a perspective we don't have. And you have time and energy that I don't. Everyone has their advantages." That conversation marked a turning point in Margaret's relationship with the younger colleagues. Many started seeking her out to discuss practical cases and understand how to apply theory to real life. Brittany, however, became increasingly isolated and bitter. Her attempts to humiliate Margaret only served to expose her own immaturity. One day during a constitutional law class, the professor presented a complex case about fundamental rights. "Would anyone like to comment on this case?" he asked. Brittany quickly raised her hand. "Professor, it's clearly a violation of the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution. Interesting interpretation, Miss Brittany. Would anyone else like to comment?" Margaret raised her hand. "Professor, with all due respect to my colleague Brittany, I believe the issue is more complex. We're facing a conflict between fundamental rights where we need to apply the principle of proportionality." Margaret spent the next 10 minutes giving a detailed analysis of the case, citing case law and doctrine. The room fell silent. "Excellent analysis, Mrs. Johnson," said the professor. "That's exactly the complexity this case presents." Brittany turned red with anger and humiliation. After class, she exploded. "You're getting too full of yourself, Margaret, showing off to impress the teachers." "Brittany, I just answered the professor's question." "Answered? You gave a lecture? You want to humiliate us?" "No one is trying to humiliate anyone. We're all here to learn." "I won't take lessons from a cleaning lady." The comment was overheard by several people in the hallway. Brooke approached. "Brittany, that was really ugly. Margaret is our classmate. She deserves respect." "Respect is earned, not begged for," replied Brittany, walking away with her head held high. Margaret was shaken by the comment. No matter how hard she tried to be strong, it still hurt to be looked down on because of her profession. "Don't pay attention to her, Margaret," said Brooke. "Brittany is jealous because you're a better student than her. It's not about being better or worse, Brooke. It's about mutual respect. But you deserve all the respect in the world. You're here on your own merit, studying and working at the same time. That's admirable." That night when she got home, Margaret found Mrs. Dorothy watching the news. "How was college today, dear?" "Complicated, Mom. Sometimes I feel like I'm swimming against the current." "You are, dear. But look at all you've achieved. You're in your second year with the best grades in the class. That counts for something." "It does, but it's exhausting having to prove competence every day." "Dear, when your father left us, I also had to prove every day that I could raise you alone. People doubted, thought I couldn't handle it. But look how you've grown up." Margaret smiled for the first time that day. "Mum, sometimes I'm afraid I won't be able to finish the course." "Why?" "There are so many obstacles. At work, at college. Sometimes even at home I feel like I'm neglecting you. Margaret Johnson, you've never neglected me a day in your life. You're fulfilling a dream I never could. That fills me with pride. Thank you, Mom. I needed to hear that. And another thing, dear, when you graduate, you'll be a real lawyer. You won't be an ex-cleaning lady lawyer, you'll be a lawyer, period." Mrs. Dorothy's words gave Margaret strength to face the challenges ahead, and they weren't long in coming. The following week, Margaret was called to the Human Resources Department again. "Margaret, we need to talk about a delicate situation," said Valerie Peters. "What happened now?" "We've received complaints that you've been using work hours to study." Margaret couldn't believe it. "That's a lie. I study at home or at college, never during work hours." "We have reports that you were seen with books during office hours." "Books from where?" "That's irrelevant. What matters is we don't tolerate employees using work hours for personal activities." Margaret took a deep breath. She knew it was another setup by Marlene and Josh. But how to prove it? "Valerie, in 3 years working here, has there ever been any complaint about my work quality?" "No, but have I ever been late or absent without justification?" "No, but that doesn't mean—" "Then why did these accusations start exactly when I began studying law?" Valerie grew uncomfortable with the direct question. "Margaret, I'm just relaying the complaints that reached me." "And who made these complaints?" "That's confidential." "Of course it is," said Margaret with irony. "It's always confidential when it's false accusations against me." "You're being insubordinate." "I'm being honest. And there's a difference." Valerie closed the folder on the desk. "Consider this a verbal warning. Any new complaint will result in stricter measures." Margaret left the meeting furious. She was being systematically targeted, and nobody seemed willing to investigate who was behind the accusations. That afternoon, she decided to confront Marlene directly. "Marlene, I need to talk to you." "I'm busy," Marlene replied without looking at Margaret. "It's important." "For you, maybe, not for me." Margaret took a deep breath and decided to be direct. "Why are you doing this to me?" "Doing what?" "The false accusations, the targeting, why?" Marlene finally looked at Margaret, and there was anger in her eyes. "You really don't get it, do you?" "I really don't." "Margaret, we worked side by side for 3 years. We ate together, complained about the same things, shared the same problems. We were equals. And we still are." "We're not," Marlene exploded. "You became a college student, the boss's favorite, an example of overcoming odds. And me? I remained the same old cleaning lady." Margaret finally understood. "Marlene, you can study too. You can also try for a better life." "At 48, with 3 kids to raise alone, without some rich sponsor to pay for my studies?" "You don't need a rich sponsor. There are programs—" "Margaret, stop treating me like an idiot," shouted Marlene. "You got lucky, I didn't. Accept that." "It wasn't luck, Marlene. It was hard work, dedication. It was playing the poor little thing for a rich man. Just admit it." The accusation hit Margaret like a punch to the stomach. "Marlene, you know that's not true." "Do I? Then explain how a cleaning lady gets a full scholarship at a private university." "Because I studied in secret for months, because I showed I had the capability." "Oh, really? And where did you study in secret? In my building or in his?" "Here at work, after hours." "How convenient. Alone with the boss after everyone else had left." Margaret realized it was useless trying to convince Marlene. The woman had created a version of the story that justified her own frustration, and she wasn't willing to abandon it. "Marlene, I'm sorry you feel that way, but I won't let your bitterness destroy my life." "Your life?" Marlene laughed scornfully. "You think you have a life. Look at yourself, Margaret. Thin, tired, aged. You're killing yourself for a fantasy." "It's not a fantasy. It's a dream I'm making come true. A dream that will end when your boss gets tired of you. And then what's left? A 50-year-old woman with no job and no degree." "That won't happen." "Won't it?" Marlene stepped closer. "You think you know rich men? They play with poor women like us and then discard them." Margaret couldn't take it anymore. "Enough, Marlene, I won't listen to this nonsense anymore." "Nonsense? You'll see when reality hits, Margaret, and I'll be here to say, I told you so." Margaret left the locker room with a heavy heart. The conversation with Marlene had been more painful than she expected. Not because of her colleague's anger, but because of the pain she had sensed behind the anger. Marlene was frustrated with her own life and was projecting that frustration onto Margaret. It was easier to believe that Margaret had cheated than to accept that she herself had given up fighting for something better. That night at college, Margaret had trouble concentrating. Marlene's words echoed in her head. What if she was killing herself for a fantasy? What if she really was too old to start a new career? "Margaret, are you okay?" asked Professor Charles after class. "Yes, Professor, just worried about some personal problems." "Would you like to talk about it?" Margaret hesitated but decided to open up. "Professor, sometimes I wonder if I'm doing the right thing, if I'm not too old for this." "Margaret, can I tell you something as a teacher and as someone who's lived a little?" "Of course. Age is just a number when it comes to learning. I have 18-year-old students who don't have a tenth of your maturity and dedication." "But what about opportunities after graduation? Who's going to hire a 55-year-old lawyer?" "People who need an experienced, dedicated lawyer who understands the difficulties of real life," the professor replied without hesitation. "Do you really think so?" "Margaret, in 20 years of teaching, I can count on one hand the students who have impressed me as much as you. Your life perspective brings a richness to the course that young people simply can't offer." "Thank you, Professor. I needed to hear that. And one more thing. When you graduate, I'll make sure to recommend you to some law firms I know. Real lawyers recognize competence when they see it." Margaret left college that night with a lighter heart. The professor's words had renewed her confidence, but the problems at work kept getting worse. Josh had found a new way to torment her, sabotaging her work. Margaret would arrive in the morning and find the bathroom she had cleaned the night before dirty again. Rooms she had left spotless would have trash scattered on the floor. At first, she thought they were coincidences. But when it happened for the 5th time in 2 weeks, she realized it was deliberate sabotage. One night, she decided to stay hidden to catch the person responsible. She finished her work as usual, but hid in the women's bathroom on the 18th floor. Around 10 at night, she heard footsteps in the hallway. She peeked through the slightly open door and saw Josh entering the men's bathroom with a trash bag. Margaret waited for him to leave and went to check. The bathroom was a mess. Toilet paper unrolled on the floor, dirty sink, trash scattered everywhere. The next morning, she went straight to HR. "Valerie, I need to report a serious situation." "What happened now, Margaret?" "Josh is sabotaging my work. Last night I saw him deliberately mess up a bathroom I had cleaned." "Do you have proof of this accusation?" "I saw it with my own eyes." "That's not legal proof, Margaret. It's your word against his." "Then install cameras in the hallways I clean. You'll see I'm telling the truth." "The company won't install cameras because of an employee's paranoia." "Paranoia?" Margaret couldn't believe it. "Valerie, someone is deliberately sabotaging my work to harm me, and you call that paranoia? Margaret, you've been very stressed lately. Maybe you should consider taking some time off." "I don't need time off. I need you to do something about this harassment." "What harassment? You're being treated the same as all other employees." Margaret realized it was useless. HR wasn't interested in investigating anything that might complicate their lives. That night, she talked to Richard about the situation. He welcomed her into his office with his usual cordiality. "Margaret, what brings you here today?" "Dr. Richard, I'm being systematically targeted by some co-workers." "What do you mean?" Margaret told him about the sabotage, the false accusations, the constant hostility. "And HR hasn't done anything about it? They say they don't have proof that it's my word against theirs." Richard became thoughtful. "Margaret, I'll be honest with you. This situation worries me not just as your employer, but as the person who offered you the scholarship." Margaret's heart raced. "Are you thinking of cancelling the scholarship?" "No, on the contrary. I'm thinking of taking you out of the line of fire." "What do you mean?" "I want to transfer you to an administrative role, an assistant in my office." Margaret was surprised. "Doctor, I appreciate the offer, but I don't want people to think I'm getting special treatment." "Margaret, you're already being accused of getting special treatment no matter what you do. At least this way you'll be away from the hostility from the other cleaners." "But the salary—" "It will be appropriate for the new role. Much better than your current one." Margaret was tempted. The offer would solve many of her financial problems and remove her from the hostile environment. "Can I think about it?" "Of course. But don't take too long. I don't like seeing employees being targeted." Margaret left the office confused. The promotion would be great, but it would also confirm all the suspicions about her relationship with Richard. That night at college, she talked to Brooke about the dilemma. "Margaret, take the promotion. You deserve a better life. But what about the gossip? They'll say I confirmed all the suspicions." "So what? The people who know you understand what kind of person you are." "It's not that simple, Brooke. My reputation is all I have." "Your reputation won't pay your bills or make your studies easier. Take the promotion." Margaret spent the whole night thinking. On one hand, the opportunity to improve her life and escape the targeting. On the other, the confirmation of all the malicious suspicions about her. The next morning, she made her decision. She sought out Richard in his office. "Doctor, I accept the promotion." "Excellent. You can start on Monday." "Thank you for the opportunity." "Margaret, you deserve this and much more. Your work has always been exemplary." "Dr. Richard, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Why do you care so much about my success?" "I'm not questioning it. I just want to understand." Richard was silent for a few seconds. "I've told you about my mother, right?" "Yes." "She worked her whole life cleaning offices like this one. She was always treated as invisible, as someone who didn't matter." Richard stood up and went to the window. When I see you studying, I see her. When I see your determination, I see hers. It's like I'm giving her the opportunity she never had. I understand. And also because I admire people who fight against their circumstances. You could have just accepted your situation like many do. But you chose to fight. Sometimes it doesn't feel like I'm winning this fight. You are. Every day you keep studying, every exam you pass, every obstacle you overcome is a victory. Margaret left the office moved. Richard had articulated something she felt but couldn't express. Every small step was a victory over circumstances that seemed impossible to overcome. On Monday, Margaret began her new role as an administrative assistant. Richard's office was on the 25th floor, far from the other cleaning staff. Her new co-workers were polite but distant. The head secretary, Felicia Roberts, a 35-year-old woman always impeccably dressed, greeted her with professional coldness. "Margaret, you will be responsible for files, scheduling, and some correspondence. Nothing too complicated." The condescending tone irritated Margaret, but she maintained her composure. "Understood. Can I count on your help if I have questions?" "If it's absolutely necessary," replied Brittany, making it clear she considered Margaret's presence an imposition. In the first few days, Margaret worked hard to learn quickly. She organized files that had been in disarray for months, created a more efficient scheduling system, and reviewed correspondence with attention to detail. Richard was impressed with her performance. "Margaret, in 1 week you've organized things that were messy for months." "Thank you, Doctor. I'm trying to do my best." "And you're succeeding. Brittany mentioned you have a knack for legal documents." Margaret smiled. Brittany had made the comment as a veiled criticism, suggesting Margaret was meddling in matters beyond her competence. But Richard had interpreted it as praise. At college, the new routine was making studying much easier. Margaret got home earlier, had energy to focus better in class, and was keeping up with coursework more effectively. Her grades remained excellent, which further increased Brittany's resentment at college. "Must be nice having extra energy now that you don't clean bathrooms anymore," the young blonde remarked maliciously. "It's true, I have more energy to study," Margaret replied without taking the bait. "And more time to dedicate to the boss, I imagine." "Brittany, don't you get tired of always insinuating the same thing?" "Insinuating? I'm just observing the facts." "What facts?" "Janitor turns administrative assistant overnight. What an interesting coincidence." Margaret took a deep breath. "Brittany, you're 18. When you turn 50, you'll understand life is more complex than your teenage fantasies." "My fantasies?" Brittany laughed. "You're the one living in fantasy here." "How so?" "Thinking you'll graduate and become a real lawyer, that some serious firm will hire a 50-year-old former janitor." Brittany's words touched on a deep fear of Margaret's. It was the same doubt that haunted her during sleepless nights. "At least I'm trying, Brittany. That's more than many people do." "Trying is one thing. Succeeding is completely different." Margaret left that conversation disturbed. What if Brittany was right? What if she was deluding herself about her future prospects? That night she talked with Mrs. Dorothy about her insecurities. "Mum, sometimes I'm afraid I'm fooling myself. What if I graduate and can't get work as a lawyer? Daughter, you've already achieved things that seemed impossible. Why would it be different after graduation?" "Because the job market is cruel to people my age." "It might be, but you have something younger people don't have." "What?" "Life experience, determination, humility to learn. That's worth a lot." "I hope you're right, Mum." "I am. And another thing. Even if it takes time to get work as a lawyer, you've already improved your life. You're earning more, working in better conditions." "That's true. And most importantly, you're showing other women like us that it's possible to dream big even after 50. Her mother's words comforted Margaret. Even if she couldn't work as a lawyer immediately after graduating, she had already achieved so much. At work, Margaret was adapting well to her new role. She discovered she had an aptitude for administrative and legal matters. Frequently, Richard asked for her opinion on documents. "Margaret, could you take a look at this contract? I want your opinion." "Of course, Doctor." Margaret read carefully and always found details others had missed. Doctor, here in the 7th clause there's an ambiguity that could cause future problems. Richard would check and confirm Margaret was right. How did you notice that? We're studying contract interpretation in college. The professor always says to pay attention to ambiguities. Excellent. You're applying academic knowledge in practice. Felicia Roberts didn't like these interactions between Margaret and Richard at all. She began making sharp comments. Interesting how our new assistant became a legal consultant so quickly, she said sarcastically. Margaret has an ease with legal documents, Richard replied. It's useful to have someone with that ability on the team. Of course, very convenient. Margaret noticed the tension, but tried to maintain professionalism. She knew any reaction from her would be interpreted as confirmation of Felicia's suspicions. One day, Richard needed to travel for a meeting in Washington, D.C., and asked Margaret to accompany him to take notes and organize documents. It's a 2-day business trip. Would you be available? Yes, Doctor, but won't this be misinterpreted? By whom? By the other employees. They might find it strange for a new assistant to travel with the boss. Richard became thoughtful. Margaret, I understand your concern, but I can't let gossip interfere with work. I need someone competent on this trip, and you're the most qualified person. All right, I'll arrange everything. But Margaret was right to worry. As soon as news of the trip spread, the malicious comments started again with full force. Romantic trip to Washington, D.C., Felicia Roberts commented to other employees. Now things are getting serious, someone else said. Margaret tried to ignore it, but it was difficult. At college, even some colleagues who respected her began asking questions. Margaret, is it true you're traveling with your boss? Asked Brooke, concerned. It's a business trip, Brooke, nothing more. I know, but people are commenting. What kind of comments? That you're having an affair, that the promotion was in exchange for sexual favors. Margaret felt her stomach turn. And you believe that? Of course not. But I'm worried about your reputation. My reputation has to be based on truth, not gossip. I agree, but sometimes perception is stronger than truth. Margaret went on the trip with a heavy heart. It was an important professional opportunity, but also a risk to her reputation. The trip went well. Margaret took notes efficiently, organized documents, and demonstrated competence in all tasks. Richard was impressed with her ability. Margaret, you were crucial in this meeting. Your notes were perfect. Thank you, Doctor. It was a very enriching experience. Rest assured you'll be called for other important trips. But when they returned to New York City, the situation had become even more complicated. Patricia Thompson had found out about the trip and was furious. Richard, I need to speak with you, she said, appearing at the office the following Monday. Patricia, now is not the time. Now is exactly the time. You traveled with that woman to Washington, D.C. Margaret was in the next room and heard the entire argument. It was a business trip, Patricia. Business. A cleaning woman doing work that requires travel to Washington, D.C.? Margaret is no longer a cleaner. She's my administrative assistant. How convenient. You promote your mistress and then travel with her. Patricia, you're being ridiculous and unfair. Unfair. My husband traveling with a woman who's clearly interested in him, and I'm being unfair. Margaret couldn't stand listening anymore. She entered the room where they were arguing. Excuse me, she said with a firm voice. Patricia and Richard stopped arguing and looked at her. Mrs. Patricia, may I speak with you for a few minutes? We have nothing to talk about, Patricia replied coldly. I believe we do. Margaret, you don't need to, Richard began. Yes, I do, Doctor. This is about my reputation and my character. Margaret looked directly at Patricia. Ma'am, I understand your concern. If I were married and my husband traveled with a female employee, I'd be suspicious too. Patricia was surprised by Margaret's frankness. But I can assure you there has never been anything inappropriate between your husband and me, nor will there be. Why should I believe you? Because I'm a woman just like you. I have an 80-year-old mother who depends on me. I have a reputation I've built over 53 years of honest living. Patricia remained silent. Your husband offered me a study opportunity because he saw determination in me. The same determination your mother probably had to raise him. How do you know about my mother-in-law? Because he told me. He told me she worked her whole life to give him an education, and that he helps me because he sees her in me. Patricia looked at Richard, who confirmed with a nod. Mrs. Patricia, I would never do anything to harm a marriage. I would never be the other woman. And why should I trust your word? Because I have nothing to gain by lying to you. If I wanted to have an affair with a rich man, I wouldn't choose a married one. I'd choose a single man who could offer me a serious relationship. Margaret's logic made Patricia think. Besides, continued Margaret, if I wanted to use someone to improve my life, I would have done it long ago. I've been cleaning offices for decades. I've met many rich men, many single bosses. And why didn't you? Because it's not in my character. Because I prefer to earn things through work and study. Patricia remained silent for a few minutes. You speak well for someone with your profession. I've been studying law for 2 years, ma'am. I learned to argue. And you really intend to become a lawyer? Yes, I do. It's been my dream since I was 20. Patricia looked at Margaret with a different expression, as if seeing her for the first time. And do you think you'll make it? I'll do my best to make it. Patricia turned to Richard. And you, do you really believe she can be a lawyer? I completely believe it. Margaret has the best grades in her class, has determination, and has a real-life perspective that few lawyers have. Patricia became thoughtful. All right, but I want to make it clear. I'll be watching. You have every right to, replied Margaret, and if you ever see anything that worries you, come talk to me directly. I will do that. Patricia left the office, leaving Margaret and Richard alone. Margaret, you didn't have to do that, said Richard. Yes, I did. I can't let misunderstandings destroy your marriage. Thank you, that was very mature of you. Dr. Richard, may I suggest something? Of course. Perhaps it would be better for Mrs. Patricia to participate more in decisions about employees. That way she won't feel excluded. Richard smiled. That's a good idea. You really think like a lawyer. I'm learning that resolving conflicts is better than avoiding them. In the following days, the atmosphere in the office improved significantly. Patricia started appearing more frequently and talking with Margaret in a cordial manner. How are your studies going? She asked one day. Well, thank you. I'm in my 3rd year now. And what do you plan to do after graduating? Initially, perhaps work at a firm to gain experience. After that, who knows, open my own practice. Specializing in what? Labor law. I want to help people who've gone through the same problems I have. Patricia nodded thoughtfully. That's a good cause. Do you think I'm being too ambitious? Ambitious? Patricia smiled. Margaret, after getting to know your story better, I think you're inspiring. How so? How many people would have the courage to start over at 50? To face all that hostility to fulfill a dream? Would you do it? I don't know. I hope so, but I don't know. That conversation marked the beginning of an unexpected friendship between Margaret and Patricia. Richard's wife began to genuinely take interest in Margaret's journey. At college, Margaret was standing out more and more. In her 4th year, she was invited to participate in a teaching assistant program. Mrs. Johnson, would you like to be the teaching assistant for the labor law course? Asked the professor in charge. Me? But there are younger students who... Precisely why I want you. Your practical experience perfectly complements the theory we teach. Margaret accepted the assistantship, which created another episode of tension with Brittany from college. So now you're a professor too? She commented sarcastically. I'm a teaching assistant, Brittany. I help other students with their questions. Of course. And I'm sure they chose you for your vast academic knowledge. They chose me because I have practical experience in labor law, Margaret replied calmly. Experience in suffering exploitation isn't the same as understanding laws. You're right, but the two together make all the difference. As a teaching assistant, Margaret helped students who had difficulty understanding practical concepts. Her ability to translate theory into real examples was exceptional. Margaret, can you explain again the difference between termination for cause and termination without cause? Asked a student. Of course. Imagine you work at a company and arrive late every day. That could be termination for cause. But if the company decides to let you go because they're cutting costs, that's termination without cause. And what's the practical difference? In termination for cause, you don't receive severance pay or 401k, savings penalties. In termination without cause, you receive everything. Wow, when you explain it, it becomes much clearer, said a student. It's because she's lived through these situations, explained another student. Margaret felt fulfilled helping her classmates. It was a preview of what she hoped to do as a lawyer, using her experience to help other people. At work, there were also important developments. Richard was expanding the business and needed more legal assistance. Margaret, I thought about hiring another lawyer for the team, but perhaps it would be interesting to wait until you graduate. Doctor, I still have 1.5 years until I graduate. That's not a problem. We can wait. But are you offering me a position? I'm offering you an opportunity to consider. When you graduate, if you want, you can work here as a lawyer. Margaret was moved. It was the guarantee that she would have a job after graduating. Doctor, I don't know how to thank you. No need to thank me. It's a business decision. I need competent lawyers and you will be a competent lawyer. How can you be so sure? Because I've been working with you for 2 years. I know how you think, how you solve problems, how dedicated you are. These are essential qualities for a good lawyer. That evening, Margaret came home euphoric. Mum, Dr. Richard offered me a job for when I graduate. That's wonderful, dear. You deserve all the best. I can hardly believe it's working out, Mum, that I'm really going to be a lawyer. I always knew it would work out, dear. You have determination to spare. Sometimes I'm afraid I'm dreaming. You're not dreaming, dear. You're living the result of hard work and dedication. Margaret fell asleep that night with a smile on her face. For the first time in years, she felt like everything was falling into place. But life, as always, had more surprises in store. At college, the atmosphere was changing. Some classmates who had previously been hostile began treating her with respect, especially after finding out she would be hired as a lawyer. Margaret, is it true you already have a guaranteed job when you graduate? Asked a classmate who had never spoken to her before. It's a possibility, Margaret replied modestly. Lucky, huh? Starting off with a good salary right away. It wasn't luck. It was hard work. Of course. But having a boss who likes you helps a lot. Margaret realized that even her success would be misinterpreted maliciously by some people, but she didn't care as much anymore. She had learned to focus on what really mattered. Brittany, however, was growing increasingly bitter about Margaret's success. Must be nice to have life handed to you on a silver platter, she remarked during a class. Handed to me? Margaret couldn't believe the statement. Oh, come on, Margaret. A guaranteed job, a boss who pays for your studies. Not bad for someone who started out cleaning bathrooms. Brittany, do you think my life has been easy? Compared to most people, yes. Margaret took a deep breath. She decided it was time for a frank conversation. Brittany, you're 18. You live with your parents, you don't work, you have no responsibilities. Your only concern is studying. So what? I've been working since I was 15. I've been supporting a sick mother for decades. I wake up at 5 in the morning and go to sleep at midnight every day and have for 4 years. But you have a rich benefactor to pay your bills. A rich benefactor? Margaret laughed, but without humor. Brittany, do you know how much I earned as a cleaner? $800 a month. Do you know how much my mother's medicine costs? $300 a month. Brittany felt uncomfortable with the numbers. Do you know what it's like to study for an exam after spending 10 hours cleaning offices? Having to read civil law with your hands still smelling like disinfectant? Margaret, I'm not asking for pity, Brittany. I'm explaining that an easy life would be yours. My life has been a constant struggle. I'm sorry. I guess I never thought about it that way. You don't need to apologize. You just need to understand that everyone has their own battles. That conversation marked a change in Brittany's attitude. The young woman didn't become friends with Margaret, but she stopped the malicious comments. Margaret was approaching the end of her course when something happened that almost destroyed all her plans. Mrs. Dorothy had a severe heart attack and needed to be rushed to the hospital. Margaret, I need to speak with you about your mother's condition, said the cardiologist. How is she, doctor? Stable for now, but she needs a complex heart surgery. It's risky, but it's her only chance for a good quality of life. And how much does that surgery cost? Through Medicare, it could take months to get a spot. Privately, about $80,000. Margaret felt her world collapse. She didn't have $80,000. Not even close. "Doctor, if she doesn't have the surgery, her condition will progressively worsen. In a few months, any exertion could be fatal." Margaret left the hospital devastated. How could she get $80,000 in just a few months? Her only option would be to borrow money from Richard, but that would confirm all the suspicions about her relationship with him. That night she couldn't study. She stayed by her mother's bedside in the hospital, holding her hand. "Sweetie, you don't have to stay here all night," Mrs. Dorothy said in a weak voice. "I want to stay, Mum." "Margaret, if something happens to me—" "Don't talk like that, Mum. Everything will be fine. If something happens, I want you to keep studying. To graduate." "Mom, stop it. Promise me, sweetie. Promise you won't give up on your dream." Margaret held her mother's hand tightly. "I promise, Mom, but you will be there at my graduation." On Monday, Margaret arrived at work, visibly shaken. Richard noticed immediately. "Margaret, are you all right?" "My mother is in the hospital. She needs heart surgery." "I'm so sorry. Is it serious?" "Very, and very expensive." Richard became thoughtful. "Margaret, I can help with the medical expenses." "Doctor, I can't accept. You've already done so much for me." "Margaret, it's not charity. Consider it a loan. You can pay it back after you graduate." "It's $80,000, Doctor. It would take years to pay back." "So what? Time is something we have plenty of." Margaret felt her eyes fill with tears. "Why are you doing this for me?" "Because it's the right thing to do, and because my mother would have been happy to know I helped yours." Margaret accepted the loan, but with one condition. Everything would be officially documented, with interest and a repayment deadline. "I don't want anyone to say it was a gift," she explained. "I completely understand. Mrs. Dorothy's surgery was successful, but the recovery would be long. Margaret had to hire a private nurse to care for her mother during the day. All this happened just 6 months before her graduation. Margaret was exhausted, worried, and financially overwhelmed. In college, her performance began to slip slightly. Nothing serious, but noticeable. "Margaret, are you okay?" asked Professor Charles after a class where she seemed distracted. "I'm dealing with some family problems, Professor." "Anything that might jeopardize your graduation?" "I hope not." "Margaret, you've come too far to give up now. If you need anything, I'm here to help." "Thank you, Professor. I need to ask, do you really believe I can get work as a lawyer?" "Why do you ask that?" "Because sometimes I'm afraid I'm fooling myself. A 55-year-old lawyer with no practical experience." "Margaret, stop that. You have more practical experience than most lawyers I know. Life experience, work experience, fighting spirit. But the firms that don't hire you because of your age will miss out on an excellent professional, and there will be many who recognize your value." The professor's words cheered Margaret up, but the doubts remained, especially when she saw younger classmates landing internships at big firms. "Margaret, aren't you going to do an internship?" asked Brooke. "I already work, Brooke. I don't have time for an internship." "But it's important for your resume." "I hope my work experience makes up for the lack of an academic internship." At that time, Margaret was sleeping only 4 hours a night. She woke up at 5 to care for her mother, worked from 8 to 6, went to college from 7 to 11, and studied until 1 in the morning. Patricia Thompson noticed Margaret's exhausted state. "Margaret, you need to rest. You look terrible." "I'm fine, Mrs. Patricia, just a little tired." "A little? You're killing yourself." "It's just until my mother fully recovers." "And your graduation?" "You can't jeopardize that." "I won't jeopardize it. Only 4 months left." Patricia grew worried and spoke with Richard. "Honey, Margaret is working herself to death. I think you should give her some time off." "I already offered. She won't accept." "Then make her. You're the boss." "Patricia, she's pushing herself so hard precisely because she wants to honor the loan we gave. If I force her to take time off, she'll feel bad. And if she burns out from exhaustion, how will she honor anything?" Richard decided to try a different approach. "Margaret, I need you to take a few days off." "Why, Doctor? Did something happen? Yes, you're exhausted and it's affecting the quality of your work. Margaret was alarmed. Doctor, I can improve. I can... Margaret, it's not criticism. It's concern. You need to rest so you can keep going. But if I miss work, it will be paid time off, 3 days for you to recover. Margaret ended up accepting the time off, but spent the 3 days studying intensively to make up for lost time. When she returned to work, Richard noticed she looked a bit better. How was your rest? Very productive, Doctor. I managed to study several subjects. Richard laughed. Margaret, rest means doing nothing, not studying intensively. For me, studying is relaxing. You're incredible. After you graduate, you'll miss studying. I doubt it. I plan to do a postgraduate degree. Of course you do. Richard shook his head, amused. The big day of the graduation had finally arrived. Margaret had managed to finish her course with an overall average above 9, making her one of the top students in her class. Mrs. Dorothy, now much better after her surgery, insisted on attending the ceremony. Honey, I wouldn't miss your graduation for anything in the world. Mom, it will be tiring for you. Margaret, I've waited 55 years to see you graduate. I'm not going to miss it now. Richard and Patricia also attended the graduation, occupying seats of honor as Margaret's special guests. When Margaret went up on stage to receive her diploma, the emotion was indescribable. She looked out at the audience and saw Mrs. Dorothy crying with pride, Richard and Patricia applauding enthusiastically, and several co-workers who had come to show their support. Even Marlene was there. The former cleaning colleague had asked Richard for permission to watch the ceremony. During the class speech, Margaret was chosen to speak on behalf of the graduates. Colleagues, professors, family members, she began with an emotional voice. Today is not just a graduation. It is proof that it is never too late to dream. The audience fell silent. 5 years ago, I was a 50-year-old cleaner who studied in secret after my shift. Many people doubted me. Many said it was too late, that it was an impossible dream. Margaret looked at Mrs. Dorothy. But I had a mother who taught me that dignity does not depend on your profession, that dreams have no age, that determination is stronger than circumstances. The applause started timidly. I had employers who believed in my potential when I doubted myself, who gave me opportunities when others only saw a cleaner. Richard and Patricia smiled emotionally, and I had colleagues who taught me that knowledge is better when shared, that individual success is worthless if it cannot be used to help others. Margaret looked out at the entire audience. Today I do not graduate just as a lawyer, just as Guy. I graduate as living proof that transformation is possible, that a person can change their life if they are willing to fight for it. The applause grew louder, and I promise to use my degree not just for my personal success, but to help other people like me, people who work hard, who dream big, who deserve opportunities. Margaret raised her diploma. This diploma is not just mine. It belongs to every woman who has cleaned offices dreaming of sitting on the other side of the desk. It belongs to every person who has been underestimated because of their background. It belongs to everyone who never gave up believing. The audience rose in prolonged applause. There were tears in many eyes. After the ceremony, Margaret was surrounded by people wanting to congratulate her. "Margaret, your speech was beautiful," said Brooke, moved. "Thank you. It came from the heart." Even Felicia, the young woman who had been so hostile to her, approached. "Margaret, I apologize for everything I said during the course." "Felicia, you don't need to apologize. We were young." "Well, you were young," said Margaret, smiling. "You taught me that maturity has nothing to do with age. And you taught me that determination can overcome any hostility." Professor Charles also congratulated her. "Margaret, it was a pleasure to have you as a student. You changed our class for the better." "Thank you, Professor. You were fundamental in my journey." "And now, do you have plans already?" "I'm going to work as a lawyer at Dr. Richard's firm for a few years, gain experience, pay off my debts. After that, who knows, maybe open my own practice." "I'm sure you will be an exceptional lawyer." Marlene also approached Margaret, visibly emotional. "Margaret, I need to apologize. Marlene, I'm so glad you came. I was horrible to you. I said terrible things. You were angry at life, not at me, I understand. No, you don't. I was jealous. You, afraid that your success would show my failure. Margaret held Marlene's arm. Marlene, your worth as a person doesn't depend on a diploma. You're smart, hard-working, honest. That counts for a lot. But you managed to get out of our situation. And you can too. If you want, I can help you study. You'd do that after everything I did? I would. Because I understand why you did it. The two hugged, ending years of conflict. Mrs. Dorothy was beaming. My dear, I'm so proud I can't find the words. Thank you for never giving up on me, Mum. How could I give up? You're my daughter, my pride. Richard and Patricia were the last to say goodbye. Margaret, on Monday you start as the company's official attorney, said Richard. Doctor, I still can't believe I made it. Believe it, and get ready for a lot of work. I have several cases waiting for you. Patricia hugged Margaret affectionately. Margaret, you're an inspiration. To me, to other women, to everyone who has seemingly impossible dreams. Thank you for believing in me, Mrs. Patricia, for giving me a chance. Thank you for teaching me that we should never underestimate anyone. That night at home, Margaret spent a long time looking at her diploma. Mrs. Dorothy was sleeping, recovering from the emotional day. Margaret thought about everything she had been through, the humiliations, the doubts, the obstacles, the exhaustion, the persistence. She thought about all the people who doubted and all who believed. Now she was officially an attorney, Dr. Margaret Johnson. At 55, she had achieved something many considered impossible, but she knew that was just the beginning. Now she had to prove she deserved the opportunity she received. She had to honor the trust of those who believed in her, and most importantly, she had to use her success to open paths for other people, to show that transformation is possible, that dreams have no age, that determination can move mountains. The next day, Margaret arrived at the office for her first day as an attorney. She wore a simple but elegant black suit that she had bought with her first paycheck as an administrative assistant. She found a new plaque on the office door, Dr. Margaret Johnson, attorney. Her office was small, but it had a window with a view of the city. On the desk, a stack of cases waiting for her review. Richard appeared at the door. Ready to start, Dr. Margaret? More than ready, Dr. Richard. Great, because I have many clients who need an attorney who understands real life. Margaret opened the first case file. It was a labor lawsuit from a housekeeper who had been unfairly dismissed. Reading the details, Margaret smiled. It was exactly the kind of case she had always dreamed of defending. She picked up her pen and started working. Not as Margaret Johnson, the cleaning lady who studied in secret, but as Dr. Margaret Johnson, attorney. Her journey had only just begun, but she knew she was on the right path. She had not only transformed her own life, but proved to the world that limits exist only in our minds, and now it was time to help other people discover the same. End of story. So, dear listeners, what did you think of this story of overcoming? Margaret managed to prove that it's never too late to achieve our dreams. Leave in the comments. Do you believe she made the right decisions? Do you know any similar stories? We'd love to read your honest opinions. Don't forget to leave a like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other inspiring stories like this one.